The first Demon King ruled for 1,000 years, but was defeated by an unknown, as a result of which he lost his throne. According to rumors, today is the 7th day since the Demon King was replaced. Meanwhile, the royal family began to gather brave warriors who would be able to kill the new ruler until he strengthened his strength. This is a brilliant opportunity to become a warrior who defeated the Demon King. And thanks to this boy, a new legend will be written. We are transported to the city of Erms, where one of the knights meets the new warriors. He thanks them for coming and says that only one of them will be chosen to fight the Demon King. One survivor of this duel will be given the honor, together with the strongest archer Akna, magician Kadim, and healer, to take the Demon King's head off his shoulders. You need to fight to the very end and stay alive. Here in the crowd, where the blonde man was standing, there is a sharp rumble, after which a man in uniform appears in the Blue Blossom Club. The crowd cheers, greeting the commander of the knight's squad. But the surprises didn't end there. Next to the guy, another bully has landed, an invincible bark, crazy about war, who calls out to the blonde and calls him a brat, saying that the guy's place is in the public area, and if he doesn't want to be crippled, then it's time to leave. The man standing at the head of the knight's guard supports him, saying that he himself cannot believe that some little thing is on the square for duels. The boy just grins, answering them by saying that taking subordinates with him to a place where only one warrior is chosen is not really something that passes for knightly pride. It certainly angers men, because the two of them rush at a teenager with a gun, while the latter thinks that it's just a little dangerous. Well, then, he stomps his foot on the ground, standing up in a stance, so much so that the floor crumbles and breaks into numerous fragments, while the shockwave throws opponents up together with his subordinates. The blonde grabs the hilt of the sword and jumps up, hitting everyone in the air with one sharp movement. The squad leader and the bark are just lying on the ground while the squad of heroes and the gray-haired knight are standing in complete shock, not understanding what just happened. The crowd cheers, calling the kid cool. The first to wake up was the herald, whose eyes immediately lit up from such a show. He says that the hero has amazing skills before he decides to ask about his name. With a satisfied smile, the hero says that his name is Hans. The knight immediately appoints him as the commander of the Demon King's destruction squad. And while everyone was happy with someone else's little victory, a dark-haired man with bright yellow eyes was watching all this from the castle window. One of the servants asks him what he thinks about all this, to which he receives an answer. The boy seems useful, so it's worth sending him for now. Then we are shown the entrance to the Demon King's castle. The squad is heading straight there, while Hans begins to suspect something. The security turned out to be much worse than it was thought from the very beginning. Usually, in the forest of the Demon King, you can't even get through because of the powerful barrier. Akna, on the other hand, grins, arguing that, apparently, the new ruler is working on the dump, or has spent all his strength on seizing the throne of the previous king. Kadim is only glad of this, because it's much easier for them, otherwise they could have wandered there for not much longer. The archer is distracted from the conversation, noticing aloud that the healer is somehow too slow behind them. She calls out to the guy in the hood, calling him a jerk and hurrying him, although he gives a buff standing behind, but he is able to walk normally at least now. The magician also turns to them, saying that judging by the fact that the healer was already scared, this time they chose a clearly unsuccessful one. Hans, who also drew attention to the mess, immediately hurries to calm everyone down. A healer is definitely needed in the team. The latter, for some reason, really freezes, while Kadim begins to realize that something is really wrong behind. Turning his head, he notices a huge golem towering over them, and then immediately calls the warrior to turn around. Not having time to react enough, Hans only turns his head before his body is thrown aside by a giant stone hand. Fortunately, he managed to at least substitute a sword at the end. The magician immediately stood in a stance while fireballs began to appear in his palms, and the girl immediately took out a bow and pulled the string, preparing for an attack. But for some reason, the characters freeze in place, as if they are waiting for something. The healer tightens his grip on his book before Kadim snaps at him. He urgently needs to make a buff, and he is standing like a pillar. Hans, pinned to the stone wall by such a force of the golem's blow, shouts to them not to drag out time, but to start the attack as soon as possible, while the hooded man is still standing and silent, not even moving. The magician transforms one huge fireball from two, while the archer pulls the bowstring tighter and lets go, sending the arrow flying so that it collides with the flame of magic, merging together and heading straight for the golem. The blast wave causes the monster to stagger and lean back, which forced the warrior to act. The blonde immediately jumps up from his seat, clutching his sword, and after that the weapon lights up with a bright yellow light before he rushes to the slowly falling golem. Gripping the handle harder, hand swings and with one precise blow splits the monster in half, causing it to crumble into numerous stones. Getting back on his feet, the guy immediately smiles, clearly pleased with his victory, and turns to the squad to report that the guards were still present here, but then sees how Kadam grabs the healer by the breasts, indignant that he does nothing, although it is his duty to give a buff to the heroes during battle time. The magician promises that he will deal with him when they get home, before the blonde man runs up to them, who immediately asks his friend to calm down. In the end, maybe he was just confused, but as soon as the man in the hood is released, he starts laughing loudly, straight to mock, before calling the heroes complete scum who are not able to destroy such a golem without buffs. Akna says he's crazy, because the monster was definitely level 1 in size. Don't they even teach healers that? The guy continues to burst out laughing, and then stretches out his hand, showing the squad a small stone in the palm of his hand. What has been destroyed now will barely pass for this cobblestone. The girl keeps straining, not understanding what nonsense he is talking about. Endowing with vital energy, gigantism, increasing strength, these are buffs that he used only on such a stone. But what happens if you use them on a huge cobblestone? Pointing towards the cluster of stones, he uses his abilities before a purple circle appears next to his palm, the rays of which frame the entire alien silhouette. The squad froze in complete shock, looking at how another golem rises from a pile of boulders in front of them, which is several times larger than the previous one. The healer finally takes off his hood, revealing his pale face, snow-white hair, and scarlet eyes to the heroes. He only wonders what level this monster has, while the unfortunate Kadam only manages to mumble something about mercy before he is overtaken by a huge stone fist that drives the guy's body into the ground, smearing it on the ground. Hands froze with complete shock near this very fist, unable to utter a word. The white-haired one asks Beta to open the door for him before a portal appears in front of him. When asked what to do with the warrior, the healer orders to leave him, since he has nothing to do with their goals. Before entering the portal, already inside, he sits on the throne while being told that it was a great job, simultaneously calling him the Demon King. His memories began from the very day when his father returned from the war. None of the participants from the groups that were returning back from the dungeons to the applause of people were injured. Only the father behind him became a corpse. No one was sad. Nobody. At the age of 12, he became a healer with Maddie. The team members received more injuries than the monsters, but he tried to hold on. He had no other job that would allow him to feed his family. It seemed to him that Maddie also worked as a healer for the sake of the family. They comforted each other and day by day tried not to lose heart. And while the guy and the girl were sitting peacefully and looking at the night sky, he was hailed by some red-haired bully, who, apparently, is a warrior of their squad. He grabs the white-haired man by the breasts, saying that he asked him to do buffs normally, and then shows the cut, proving to the healers that they don't understand anything at all. The hero responds without hesitation by not only giving him the maximum buff, but also a barrier before he gets slapped in the face and falls to the ground. The warrior is clearly displeased with such audacity. Does the healer think that if they are on the same team, then they are somehow equal? If he doesn't know how to do anything except buffs, then at least let him apply them normally. And if he doesn't like something, then let him put all his buffs on the line and challenge him to a duel. The beaten guy only humbles him with a menacing look of scarlet eyes, but does not have time to react properly when he sees that someone else's toe of a metal shoe is directed at his face. The red-haired man is again dissatisfied with the fact that some freak dared to look at him from under his brows, while the same freak is almost lying unconscious from the force of the blow. The warrior grabs the teammate by the hair before swinging, saying that he has no manners when the owner is talking, while the rest of the squad members just stand and are silent from behind. The knight continues his tirade. The mutt, who grins at his master, must die. And just as his fist is about to come into contact with someone else's head, he was stopped by someone else's hands in time. The incomprehensible and beaten hero looks at how Maddie covered him with her body from the blow, and began to say that they are very sorry, and this will never happen again. The fist was still pressed against her sacred center, and she herself was still tense, ready to receive a blow at any moment. A nasty smile appears on the red-haired man's face before he grabs her by the palm and asks if she will apologize instead of him, and then begins to drag her along. The brown-haired woman resists, ordering Tom to let her go and stop, and then the main character himself breaks off after them. Before he was stopped by an archer, the man points an arrow at him and orders him not to move. Healers cannot harm warriors, and if he makes a mistake, they can easily kill him. The arrow appears in front of the very nose, while a variety of thoughts are swarming in the guy's head. Kill? No, Maddie's there, he can't let that happen. He just has to save her. Twitching to the side, he runs, spitting on someone else's threat, before stopping near the stairs, blinking in surprise. The girl with tears in her eyes smiled at him as she left with the warrior. The guy remained sitting, being in complete shock. The night gradually gave way to a cloudy morning, and he still continued to stare at one point. And then, hearing some sound, he immediately woke up and hopefully called his girlfriend, turning to the team that went outside. The warrior asks him if he really has been hanging around here all these hours, but the healer does not answer, continuing to mutter only one thing. Maddie, where is she? The red-haired man only apologizes with the same vile smile, and then says that she resisted too much, so he smacked her once, and Maddie screamed and died. Tears immediately gushed from his eyes, while the guy himself still could not figure out how it happened. A girl from the team whispered something in the knight's ear before he pronounced a verdict. They were kicking him out of the team and they would have to find other healers. I wonder how the drooping blonde thinks himself. Will he cope alone with what the two of them could not do? The team turns around and leaves, saying goodbye to him, while the hero is shaking with tears and rests his palms on the floor. What bastards they are. Murderers. Along with the tears, blood begins to drip onto the stone slabs. He clenches his hands into fists, biting his lip until it bleeds, trying to restrain sobs in this way. He'll just kill them. Both healers, still whole, look up at the night sky. The young man notices that it is very beautiful and he would be happy just admiring the stars with Maddie all his life. The girl responds in kind, and then adds one but. At the same second, it's not the same pretty brown-haired woman who turns to the guy, but a skeleton with small clusters of former hair, who asks why he didn't save her. The healer immediately jumps out of bed, breathing heavily and grabbing his blanket with trembling hands before lowering his head down. It's just a nightmare. He plunged into research. Food or sleep were not important to him. Without studying magic, he began to have nightmares, so the hero began to explore it like a madman. Blueprints after blueprints, a variety of spells and buffs. He was completely distraught. 5 years passed, and when all his research finally came to an end, a brutal desire for revenge filled his mind to the brim again. The palm reaches for the door handle, but immediately stops when the ghostly Maddie calls out to the young man. Where is he going? The guy just orders her to wait, as he has found a way to take revenge on that freak and bring her back to life. She keeps trying to dissuade him, because if he leaves, he may die, but the blonde one doesn't really care, so his silhouette soon disappears behind the doorway, and he himself promises to return soon. Already closer to night, his foot sets foot on the familiar land of the Demon Kingdom, and already at the top of the castle there is the king himself, who pushes off from the roof with his foot and goes straight to the main character, telling him that he is the first one who came here alone, which is already very commendable. But is he really alone? The healer creates a huge pink circle with many symbols on the stone floor, which at first causes the demon to grin. But then someone's bony hand breaks out of the ground before a full skeleton is shown, whose eyes burn scarlet. Soon several more appear behind him, some even with swords. He's not alone at all. Vladika's bony face gives nothing away, but he himself is getting closer, noticing that this is very interesting. One of the skeletons swings at the demon when he gets too close, but the undead grabs him by the skull and squeezes so hard that the top of his head just crumbles into dust. Another dead servant runs towards the king, swinging his sword and even managing to pierce someone else's chest, as the latter did not react properly. But literally a second later the Lord pulls out this weapon and with one clear blow cuts the 3 dead in half, causing them to crumble into bones. But the others still continue to move, so little of this, they have also increased in number. Having properly assessed the situation, the demon immediately disappears from the skeleton's field of view, ending up with one right in front of the very face. He blows off his skull with one blow, nails the second to the ground, holding the back of his head, knocks out all the cervical vertebrae from the third. The risen from the dead all continue to march on him in a huge pile, advancing from all sides, even jumping from above and piling on the massive body of the Lord. The healer notices that there will be no end to them, and all those whom he killed are running at him. But then the bones fly apart on different sides, while a bright blue glow appeared between them, from which the hero froze in shock. Along with this glow going into the sky, the shockwave blew away all the skeletons, while the poor guy barely managed to stand on his feet from such a gust of wind and force. Through the light, you can finally see the Lord coming out, who has not suffered any damage. He doesn't seem to care at all, because even if they don't end, it's just the power of one person. Did he really think that such tricks would happen to him? The guy, clearly surprised by this, immediately starts flipping through his book before he finds what he needs and stretches out his palm, near which a pink magic symbol is immediately formed, which was directed at one of the skeletons. The latter is enveloped by a glow of the same color, and then boulders begin to fly up to him, which cling to him, creating a semblance of muscles and skin, wearing similar stone uniforms. The king mocks him, as it is just a golem, the basis of which is a skeleton. But anyway, it's still the same ordinary cobblestone. The hero asks if he is so sure of this before this thing that has risen from the dead runs towards the Lord, rumbling and blazing, and when it approaches the bone face, it immediately strikes a powerful blow into someone else's chest. But fortunately or unfortunately, the demon manages to substitute his hand, blocking the attack. The driving force using the volcanic landscape of this place. It is at the moment when the master realizes this, the fist of the golem from an ordinary cobblestone begins to heat up to a huge number of degrees, which is why the heat is enveloping the entire body of the Dark Lord, who manages to fly back during the time before a fiery haze and a small explosion indicate that the attack attempt was failed. The demon enthusiastically notices that this is very, very interesting. The golem raises its head at the floating king before it pushes off the ground, ending up in front of the same bony face, and then raises its hand to strike just like its opponent does. Their fists collide, causing a shock wave to dissect a section of the sky, after which the demon manages to withdraw his other hand and drive someone else's cheekbone inside with his fist. After that, he strikes the same blow from the other side, repeatedly knocking out all the nonsense from the golem, while also in the sky with him. The hero watches each shockwave until 3 bright blue lights appear on the ground. The demon, meanwhile, opens his jaw in a silent growl before knocking someone else's servant into the solar plexus itself, throwing the stunned golem towards the ground, having managed to cripple several more times along the way before the latter is imprinted into the stones, unable to even move. The Lord directs his palm at his victim, in which a blue ball soon appears. The guy's ally is still trying to somehow get up, but it's useless when the same beam is directed at him, which blows his body to dust and successfully goes to the blonde, who managed to put up a shield with the help of a book. A second later, the demon is right next to him and with its sharp claws digs into the dome, piercing through it. Is that all he's capable of? The shield crumbles into small fragments, leaving the guy completely defenseless while the undead are heading towards him, saying that this is all too little. The healer grins. Is that so? 4 different golems appear behind him. That's why he made a couple more. After that, the entire territory of the battle plunged into clouds of dust and dirt, inside which the demon is breathing heavily, while still finding the strength to laugh. As everything dissipates, you can notice the next corpses of golems on the ground, which did not really cope with their task. Vladika notices that his body has become somehow light, because no one has ever increased his power so much. Thanks to this, he feels how strong he is. But then the hero calls out to him, saying that somehow all this is strange, while the king's gaze was directed towards his castle. For some reason, the silhouette of a boy could be seen on the balcony, although he was standing right in front of him. The latter continues, if he did not understand that the guy got into his castle, then the fight is not so easy for him. The demon immediately goes into a rage, calling him the last freak, with whom he only played a little, and he is already crossing the boundaries. How did this worthless guy even dare to enter his castle? The guilt of having penetrated there, he must pay with his own death. The demon steps on the ground with such force that it crumbles under his paws. Played around. Vladika instantly calms down, not really understanding other people's questions, before the blonde throws his hand up, right to the moon itself, and then abruptly lowers it down, causing another pink symbol to appear under it, which envelops the king and makes him start writhing. His blue irises abruptly change to pink before the hero approaches him, wondering if he wants to know why he feels his body so light. And all because the boy put a buff on him so that the demon could fight with his creations. It was not the king who showed leniency to him, but the guy himself in relation to the Lord. He also had a great time, that's why he's using all his strength now. Approaching almost close to the dumbfounded king, he touches his torso with his fingers, and then says a simple goodbye. We are shown the castle of demons, along the corridors of which someone is running, noticeably out of breath, and all the time calling the king as they approach the huge door. As soon as it opens, someone immediately flies in, while our familiar hero is sitting on the throne, who looks at the newcomer with his usual fatigue. The owl calls out to him, shouting that he has found out the whereabouts of those 3, and found out where they are now. The pupil of the guy instantly narrows as soon as the awareness of what is happening reaches the brain. 1,000 years ago, a new member of the royal family put forward a bill regarding healers. A healer is obliged to provide a buff to his allies. A healer is obliged to apply a debuff on enemies. A healer can use a buff on himself. The purpose of this law was to establish boundaries and the use of buffs of omnipotent healers. However, in fact, this bill was introduced in order to deter healers who were envied by people with other activities. Because of the strict punishment in case of disobedience, healers gradually began to obey the new rules. High-class healers, instead of going into battle, chose a way to help travelers by making recovery and buff elixirs for them. And as for low-rank healers, they could not even pass for an elixir in their usefulness. Therefore, they were simply used and thrown away as consumables. Out of reverie, the same owl calls out to him, who asks if the king listened to him at all. He had found his enemies. The new king confirms that he listens to him, just thought for a second. The chick asks permission to begin the report and decides to proceed to the archer named Jude. At the moment, he and his new team are on an expedition to the dragons. Then comes the magician Bibai, who is the magical commander of the castle, which houses an army of about 30 elite wizards. And the last one is Bask. He became the master of a guild consisting of 50 warriors. The guy is silent for a while before pronouncing just 3 names: Beth, Achilles, Rock. 3 pairs of legs immediately appear behind the owl, listening to the king. He gives a simple instruction to catch all 3, while the chick itself is clearly tense, not realizing at what moment they were behind him. The blonde continues to say that it absolutely does not matter to him if any victims arise in the process, except healers. The elixir, which he had been holding in his hand, at one moment breaks on the floor, on which red traces immediately appear. Let them bring them before nightfall and make them kneel before him. 3 respond, not daring to contradict the king. Meanwhile, in the village, which is located near the habitat of the Raxwell dragons, we see an archer who is heading somewhere with his team. 2 comrades discuss that the dragons were particularly cruel today, but they will get even more money. And since they had such a hard day, then they should have a drink. As if they had at least one day when they didn't drink. Passing by some alley under the conversations of teammates about the future drinking, red eyes flash in the darkness of space. Sensing something amiss, Jude abruptly turns his head towards the narrow passage, but there is still the same emptiness. There is nothing. Grabbing the bow, he immediately pulls the string, aiming the arrowhead towards the alley, before a man calls out to him, asking what happened to him and is there something there. But the archer ignores him, ordering the one who is sitting in the alley not to hide and come out, because someone's deadly energy is too powerful not to notice it. The comrade still does not understand what is happening, so he decides to ask who he is talking to. Someone is heading towards them out of the darkness, asking in surprise, did it really work out to reveal it? Which, in fact, was expected from the most experienced archer in the area. Well, if you noticed, then nothing can be done. Men look surprised when a real she-devil appears in front of them, saying that the master wants them dead. She is a servant of the demon king Beth, so let them accept this death humbly. Already in the castle, where the magicians are located, there is a real trouble. Everyone is calling for Mrs. Bibai, shouting that the magic barrier has been completely destroyed. The girl doesn't really believe in it. After all, she made it herself. But what are the enemy's forces? One guy runs up to her, who, out of breath, only has time to call out to her and say that there is only one enemy. Meanwhile, the servant of the demon king Achilles, a red-haired guy with a wand, calmly walks towards the castle, smiling contentedly. Already at the entrance to the Basque Guild stronghold, the guards begin a conversation. They themselves don't understand why the hell they are standing here every single day doing nothing before one of them notices that someone is walking in the distance. The second squints, about to ask a question, but at one moment a huge blue ray breaks through the door between them, which completely knocks down the wood and takes all those inside by surprise. A puff of smoke rises in the corridor while the guy who is standing next to the right target is yelling for everyone to be on alert. The frightened knights barely grab their weapons, continuing to stare into the thick smoke, before a hand abruptly breaks out from there, which grabs one of the guys by the face and instantly pulls him inside. There is a cry for help before everything stops, and something rolls out of the smoke, a head. One of the guards comes closer, and then raises his head when a knock-knock is heard from the smoke. After a while, the third servant of the demon king, Rock, comes out with a bloody hand, asking if the Basque is there. Rock, when confronted with red-haired looks, immediately asks if he is a Basque. The latter answers him quite calmly, asking if he has any business with him and why he came, since he has heard about his reputation. The servant says with a smile that he was ordered to catch him alive. Catch him alive? Is he sure that this is possible? Pushing off with a clawed paw from the floor, he shouts or else before rushing towards the sitting guild commander, before a green-haired guy appears in front of him, who swings his sword and shouts that Rock will not dare to approach him. But the latter only laughs, answering that the little ones should step aside before, then withdraws his hand and with a sharp blow pierces through someone else's body, taking him by surprise. The surprised subordinates literally freeze in place, only shouting Vice Commander, while the Basque himself is enraged by such a murder. He grabs the sword while the servant of the Demon King throws the lifeless body back, and then strikes a blow that should have cut the villain in half, but he managed to block it with both hands in time. The warriors continue to support their commander, shouting that his strength of spirit is on a completely different level. The red-haired man jumps aside, swinging his sword and trying to strike a couple more blows, but each time Rock blocks them only with his hands, not even straining. And at some point, when the Basque swings, about to strike another blow, the white-haired man leans down sharply and jerks his hand towards the commander, who manages to bend sideways during the time. Now it's time for the servant of the Demon King to strike eternal blows, trying somehow to catch the freak in his clawed hands. But he always dodges, parrying attacks with a sword. At some point, instead of another palm swing, Rock raises his leg, bending at the knee, and then abruptly straightens it, driving his foot into someone else's chin. Without having time to figure out after this, the Basque unwittingly gives the guy a chance for another blow, which he uses, spinning around his axis, which is why some bright point appeared in the middle of the chest on someone else's uniform, from which numerous cracks went. The blonde man hit right there, causing the armor to shatter into fragments in different directions, and the commander's body itself was thrown a couple of meters away. Fortunately, he managed to stand on his feet, even though his breath was stolen and blood is coming from his mouth. "Are you exhausted already?" Rock says in frustration that he would like to have more fun, but then notices that he needs to get back faster, so it's time to start playing a little more seriously. The other warriors who were watching the battle are clearly surprised that it wasn't all his strength. Then what is she really like? Basque notices that he smells like a lie, which is why the king's servant stretches out his hand, from the veins of which something black flows out, which gradually forms into a huge axe. Rock replies that such remarks are usually thrown by weaklings. Grinning, he offers to pile on. Caught a little off guard, the red-haired man is not going to retreat, so he pushes off with his foot, immediately reducing the distance between himself and his opponent, before jumping, swinging his sword while the guy squeezes the handle of the axe, throwing it off his shoulder, and a smirk plays on his lips. Brandishing his own weapon, the white-haired man is ready to attack completely. A second later, everything is illuminated by a bright blue light that makes its way through the same broken wooden door, after which fog forms throughout the neighborhood along with the dust that has risen. When it dissipates at least a little, there are beaten and bloody warriors under it, who, apparently, have already died. And inside, as soon as the smoke clouds dissolve, a barely alive Basque turns out to be behind him, whose clothes are torn, and the sword is completely broken. The guy apologizes with a grin for going a little too far, looking out of the fog, and then also asks if he died there. The beaten and amazed commander, who is no longer able to fight, decides to simply ask who sent him. But immediately his face widens when the servant grabs his chest and raises his fist to strike, saying that he will definitely find out when they come. Vision that was previously unfocused slowly returns to normal, allowing you to look around the environment. Basque wakes up half-naked in glowing chains, having only managed to mumble where he ended up. The commander was near some huge crystal, around which small columns towered. 3 servants stood at a distance. The awakened warrior is hailed by the same bound Bibai, who is trying to find out what is going on, but he himself does not understand. And what are they doing here at all? Jude wants to know that, too. Did he do something again that even brought them here? The red-haired man doesn't know anything at all, and some incomprehensible type attacked him. Achilles decides to dedicate them. The Demon King orders to bring them here. Apparently, they did something that made him very angry. The archer is immediately outraged, saying that this is nonsense, and they did not approach the castle of the Demon Lord at all, to which Basque agrees, asking if they have the wrong address, before calling Bibai and ordering her to remove this spell so that he can finish off these freaks as soon as possible. The girl calmly replies that she would have done it a long time ago, if only she could. Then Rock gives his voice. Is the commander really that brave or stupid if he's still showing off? Beth tells everyone to be quiet as the king comes in. The hero appears from the open portal along with the book, who approaches the hostages, proudly looking up at them before saying that they haven't seen each other for a long time. The former squad stared in surprise at the healer who appeared, while the red-haired man himself is still unable to believe that this is the Demon King. Before he begins to laugh, Who would even believe this nonsense? This is definitely a production. Og keeps shouting, calling the guy a mutt and ordering him to say hello to his master before threatening to hit him again. And anyway, why is the freak looking down on him? The she-devil, who had her back to them before, clenches her teeth, turns around briskly and with one precise blow not only knocks out the Basque's teeth, but also pulls out the tongue to hell. The heroes who saw this immediately fell silent and tensed up. The blonde man, meanwhile, notices that it takes too long for the former warrior to understand what situation he is in. But now he will tell why they were dragged here. This is the last floor of the Demon King's castle. Here is the legendary magic circle. He calls out to Bibi because she must understand what he is talking about. Every magician has heard about this device at least once. She looks startled. Really? Exactly. A magic circle that resurrects the dead. With their life force, he would bring Maddie back to life. The commander barely finds the strength to shout H-top, but the king's circle has already turned away, and the circle under them lit up bright pink. The members of the former squad began to yell while their bodies were pierced by hellish pain, and the words from their mouths sounded completely unintelligible. Basque tries to shout at the end, but only a single phrase comes out cleanly, Mahai Hiwa, before the beam of light becomes even brighter, eclipsing all the hostages and rising into the sky itself. After this, only a thick cloud of smoke remains, in which a guy tries to shout to the girl. But when it dissipates, only skeletons lie in place of the recently still living hostages, while the king himself only looks at them, not understanding what happened. This can't be happening. Why? There was no mistake in the spell. But then it comes to consciousness that at that moment the former commander shouted to him Mahai Hiwa. It doesn't take much time for the whole picture to form in your head, which only affects the healer more. Maddie, somewhere out there in some unknown place, but still alive. Achilles is sitting on some cliff, but when he looks down, he notices that someone's village is all ablaze, and heart-rending screams are coming from there. When it comes to consciousness, he immediately jumps off the stone cliff. Some people in a special uniform are given the order to catch every single elf, and those who resist should be killed without hesitation. Raising their weapons, they emit a war cry before rushing at the unfortunate eared ones, who immediately rush to run. One is struck by an archer's arrow, others are lying dead on the ground, and others are completely shackled. One couple, who had been lying on the ground before, tries to get up before a little elf jumps out in front of them with a tiny dagger, who tearfully begs for mercy for mom and dad. The boy literally begs not to touch them. A man with a spear immediately pounces on him, grinning and asking if he really thinks they won't kill such a sucker. The tip of the spear moves towards him, while the blonde himself is squinting, ready to accept his death, but no blow follows. He opens one eye and looks in surprise at the tip of the weapon that was right in front of his eye, but was stopped by someone's black palm. This something turns out to be some kind of monster, which significantly scares the guy and makes him recoil. But then he is called by the servant of the Demon King, who comes out of the fire, asking why they are doing this. The spearman only has time to mutter monster, before the other one hears the answer question, and who is he? Turning his head, the guy immediately notices his entire squad. Achilles comes closer. He doesn't want to fight, so he calmly asks them to release all the hostages while the kid looks at him with surprised eyes. Apparently, the commander of the detachment immediately suppresses this, since such a large army would not have come here from the very beginning to leave empty-handed in the end. Therefore, he should leave if he is not tired of living yet. Here Beth lands next to the red-haired one, who is interested in what is the matter here. After all, the Demon King is now finding out the location of Lady Maddie, and he may need them soon, so he needs to stay in his places. To himself, the guy who is at the head of all this grabs the phrase Demon King. Achilles replies that he wants to end everything that is happening, so could she help him? The she-devil grins, calling him too kind, before the green-haired one points in their direction, shouting to his subordinates to kill them. The men immediately rush at the servants with the gun, shouting, while Beth runs forward completely unarmed. She stops by one warrior, who is even taken aback by this, before she lifts her hand and gently touches his forehead with her fingernail, wishing sweet dreams. The guy's eyes immediately turn pale, otherwise he falls dead to the ground while the girl moves forward. The brunette repeatedly strikes absolutely everyone who stood in her way, with just a gentle touch to the forehead, from which almost the entire army instantly died. Pushing off with just one shoe, she instantly hits 3 warriors, moving so fast that they are not even able to keep track of her before they also find themselves on the ground. Beth appears in all her glory while bodies are lying behind her, which makes the squad leader seem very surprised. Achilles notices that she handled them so easily without killing them. He even envies her abilities. The guy clutches his staff. Well, then it's time for him. In the very castle of the Demon King, the blonde one calls Rock, to which he responds implicitly. The hero decides to ask what Achilles is like. After thinking for a second, he immediately gives an answer. He smiles every day and does not show his true nature, so he does not know himself. But the questioning continues, what about combat power? What is it compared to his own? Rock would tear him to shreds if he could touch him. Clutching his staff harder in the palm of his hand, Achilles puts it forward, which immediately forms a magic circle in front of him, and then someone's clawed paw steps on the ground. Out of nowhere, the very monsters begin to appear, whose brother had previously managed to protect the little elf from a spear strike. The commander and the remaining squad stared at these monsters in shock. For a moment, Rock appears, who begins to say that, of course, it will not be so easy to touch him. Meanwhile, Achilles still directs his after towards the troops, while the same gargoyle monsters begin to appear from two huge portals. The gargoyle who had previously protected the boy turns his back on him as soon as he hears the clang of swords. The monster is already ready to move into battle, while the little elf is still sitting in shock and watching the battle, turning his head to the child, as if in this way wanting to make sure that everything is fine with him. The monster is faced with the gaze of children's eyes, from which all the tears were running. The boy smiles, which takes the gargoyle by surprise. The rest of the crowd rushes to the people in uniform. One grabs someone else's head with a clawed paw, throwing someone else's body as far as possible on the fly. The other rises from the moon itself, and while the man did not have time to react, he immediately moves down, stretching out his lower leg and driving the guy into the ground, causing him to immediately cough up blood and turn off while another warrior is looking at it. Faced with the monster's gaze, the latter makes a sharp flap of its wings, disappearing from sight, before a second later it appears in front of the viewer, who was caught off guard. The gargoyle twists its tail, intending to direct the sharp tip into someone else's neck. But then Achilles shouts that you can't kill anyone, and the sharp tail stops right in front of the guy's Adam's apple, which makes the latter fall completely, obviously being shocked. Beth is not particularly happy with this, shouting that if you don't kill them now, there will be no end to them, and you can't leave people like that, to which the red-haired man only awkwardly apologizes. Here the commander finally gives his voice, calling everyone stupid bastards, reaching for the hilts of his swords, the wave of which leaves a greenish trace behind. His army couldn't even handle such a low-level monster. The servant of the Demon King stops short, noticing how the green-haired man bends down, and his swords light up only stronger and brighter. Achilles immediately orders everyone to dodge, but the commander bounces off the ground, moving so fast that the gargoyles are unable to react in time, which is why they were shown in half. Their blood drips from the blades, which the killer disgustedly brushes aside, calling it dirty, before promising that he will destroy everyone here. The guy's hand only tightens his grip on the staff, and he himself calls out to him, menacingly looking at him with his amber eyes. He probably doesn't understand words. The round tip of the servant's weapon immediately lights up with a pink light, and a huge symbol appears behind it, from the size of which the commander was stunned. But nothing happens. The warriors are still standing together with the gargoyles, which makes the green-haired man even grins. Indeed, nothing has changed, but then a huge fist flies into his face, whose hand sticks out of the portal. From such a force, the warrior's body flies off a couple of meters before the fist slams into his back with renewed force, causing the person to shudder and choke on the actual blood. And while he is still in the air, a dark purple portal looms in front of his face, from which not a fist now comes out, but a real leg, the foot of which instantly drives the scumbag into the ground, and with such force that the nearest stone slabs simply diverge, and from the shock wave and the dust that has risen is covered not only Beth, but all those who managed to survive. Something crunched under the paw, and after a couple of seconds it turns out to be raised. The commander was still alive and held the foot with both hands. Did he really think he was going to lose to the damn monster? With one sharp movement, the green-haired man throws his paw up, and then runs with great speed towards the servants, clutching the hilts of his swords. As he approaches, he does not stop thinking. An inconspicuous attack from nowhere is not suitable for ranged combat, but the greatest weakness of the summoner. Running closer and closer, the commander stops a meter away and swings his swords, the ends of the blade of which were already persistently pointing at someone else's neck. So, the biggest weakness is his body. Only the tip of the sword blade remains until the neck of the servant of the Demon King is hit by only a few pitiful centimeters. A small black dot first appears in front of its tip, from which dark purple cracks radiate. And in the next second, that very small dot turns into a huge portal, from which the same hand that grabs the green-haired man in a fist abruptly breaks out and stretches further, leaving a safe distance between the commander and the owner. Achilles says quite calmly that he liked the stranger's attempt to approach him, but did he really think that everything would be so simple? Fingers immediately squeeze someone else's little body, forcing the warrior to scream in agony from such a strong furious pressure on prayer joints and bones. But only a monster comes from his mouth anyway, before gradually it all turns into a wheeze, followed by a guy, and then into quiet pleas for salvation. But then the servant notices something out of the corner of his eye and turns his head to make sure of his assumptions before he runs into the same little boy who clutches his head and shakes with fear. Damn it. The hand that previously pressed the warrior with the desire to break his entire skeleton abruptly releases the killer, causing the unconscious case to fall to the ground before it disappears. Beth, who has been watching all this, notices that her friend still has feelings. The fire in the village was finally extinguished. The ropes that had been clutching the bodies of the hostages were finally removed. Achilles informs the elves that everything is fine now, while the she-devil is standing a little to the side, watching this. They awkwardly thank them, seeming to be completely lost, before one of the girls falls to her knees altogether. She, afraid of him. The red-haired man immediately turns his back to the liberated villagers before hurrying Beth, saying that they need to get back faster. The girl does not keep herself waiting for a long time, only snorts and flaps her wings before she follows. Together they are heading through the dark thicket of the forest in complete silence, when after a while the same boy begins to follow them. Adults immediately notice his presence and stop. The guy immediately turns to him, asking why he is following them, since they are terrible people. Let him come back soon, before he gets lost. He and the girl turn around again and continue on their way in the same silence, before after a while they hear someone's footsteps behind them again. Stopping again, Achilles looks at the child for a long time, tears still glistening in his eyes, before his silhouette begins to transform into his own. The little elf reminds him of himself. Pursing his lips, he finally gives up after a couple of seconds, sighing heavily. There's nothing to do, right? The boy lowered his head, apparently ready for any reproaches or punishments, but instead the guy holds out his hand to him. After a pair of sneakers is followed by another, children's. Now they are walking three together, a red-haired man with an elf by the hand, and a brunette a little further away. Grinning, she asks a completely rhetorical question. Looking at this couple, what will the Demon King say to this? We are already shown other corridors no less gloomy inside the building, in one of which, with his head bowed, stands a familiar green-haired man who appears to be Kane from the Royal Guard. He bows even lower, saying that he has arrived for an audience with His Royal Highness. The man who was visible from the castle at the very beginning sits on the throne and asks to leave all these stupid greetings. How did the commander even dare to return to him without catching a single elf? He immediately raises his head and apologizes, saying that some people intervened, and then adds that he assumes that they were subordinates of the Demon King. The king just grins and lazily looks away, ordering to kill absolutely all the elves. Once they received help from the Demon King, bad rumors can spread. And the amber eyes were once again riveted on the guy. The new Demon King is also worth getting rid of. He orders the legendary warrior to be called to him. Meanwhile, in some house in the middle of the forest, someone is chopping firewood, which causes splinters to fly in absolutely all directions. But a young man with red hair does not seem to care much. And then a girl calls out to him, calling him dear, which makes the man turn to his head and notice that there is some big guy with a stone face standing next to her. He says that he has to give Mr. Trios a royal order. Under the absolute silence and the worried look of the girl, the redhead moves to the man, who soon hands him the paper. Legendary warrior Trios, obey my order. I order you to quickly subdue the new Demon King, who poses a threat. That was exactly the content of the order, from reading which his face does not even change. The man grabs his axe, turning his head to the bride and saying that he will return. The redhead now and then awkwardly crumples, looking at the retreating back. Trios, he always leaves her so calmly. She herself knows what responsibility lies on him, but would it be greed if she asked for a promise to definitely come back? But that's all she can do. It's just saying goodbye to his back. A small hand pulls someone else's cheek, it seems, irritating his partner, who turns out to be a disgruntled rock. The child sits on his shoulders while the servant of the Demon King himself is wrapped in a blue aura, and Achilles himself, noticing this glow, notices that the atmosphere is a little tense. But then the latter is hailed by the bishop himself, who decides to ask what kind of boy he is. The red-haired man immediately replies that this is a child who survived in the village of elves, which was attacked the other day. His parents are dead, so he decided to take the little blonde with him. The summoner bows his head, asking for permission so that they can leave him. The blonde man is silent and then sighs, saying that since he wants it, so be it. Achilles is surprised by this, but immediately thanks the gentleman, while Rock has already taken the boy off his shoulders from behind and allowed him to frolic. The king watches as the elf chases the owl, intending to grab it, while the latter asks to leave him alone. It's going to be noisy now. Then someone calls out to the blonde guy, and turning his head in the direction of someone else's voice, colliding with a man who had something similar to the skulls of the former lord on his shoulders. The man says that he is ready to go on his behalf. He is the right hand of the demon king, Flama. He explains that the place of assignment is further away than expected, so it will take longer. The remaining servants were noticeably wary, while the healer said that everything was fine and he just had to do everything right. Having agreed, Flama bows out before immediately evaporating on the spot, disappearing from sight. The king is still a little uncomfortable giving him any instructions, but he will obviously cope. The legendary warrior is incredibly strong, but he had no inclination for heroism, so he lives in seclusion. They say he appears only in case of emergency at the call of the king. The man moves through the barracks, in which there are numerous soldiers of different specialties. Red immediately begins to explain that he will now be selecting the members of the group who will join the mission to overthrow the Demon King. They just need to stay out of his way. Trios is going to attack him himself, so first of all he needs to choose a healer. The look of amber eyes glides over everyone present, before among the crowd bumps into a pink-haired girl, who, apparently, is not even particularly interested. But the longer he looks at her, the brighter the pink aura begins to glow around her. The man immediately approaches her, and touching her head, informs her that she will be a healer. Next, he chooses a bark, after the commander of the night squad, then someone else, and another and another. When the team was assembled, Trios informs them that they are leaving tomorrow, so they should say goodbye to their family. The reward is paid immediately upon departure, and in case of successful conquest it will be paid in double amount. But then he is distracted by a voice that orders him to stop. The blonde guy starts shouting that he is the most famous shooter, so why didn't they choose him? By what criteria does he recruit a group at all? And who would even believe that this stranger with an old axe is a legendary warrior? The man glares at him for a long time, keeping silent, before he puts the weapon forward, pointing it in the direction of the daring shooter. Taken aback by this, he immediately grabs his bow and reaches for the arrows, not really understanding what the redhead wants to say, so he just asks if he wants to fight. But Trios just keeps looking at him before warning him not to move. The guy only blinks in surprise, while the warrior meanwhile draws air through his teeth, and then swings, throwing up his hand with an axe, and then with such great force hits his blade on the ground that everything around shakes, and the shock wave almost throws everyone inside. A huge yellow beam seeps even through the entire building, while the archer himself froze in native shock. A huge layer of dust has risen around him, and as soon as he looks back, the stone wall, which was completely intact before, turns out to be simply cut in half. He turns around, noticing with surprise that a huge incision runs parallel to his rack, so it does not stretch for some few meters, but successfully moves several kilometers forward, which created a kind of cliff or canyon in the ground that stretches across the entire mountain. The girl that the redhead chose as a healer only looks at it in surprise, babbling in disbelief that he cut a whole mountain, while the bark and the commander are also in complete shock, not understanding what just happened. The archer, being amazed, is completely silent while the legendary hero begins to speak. Even such a huge force is useless in the Demon King's castle. He will be indoors, and this is their home, so they do not know what traps there may be, what magic will bind them. That's why archers like him will just be a burden. He is not even suitable as a meat shield. Only pure power is the greatest weapon against demons. The man walks away from him before he glares and says sharply that such a strong person like him will be quite enough. He continues walking through the silent crowd before being hailed by the very girl Trios chose as a healer. The redhead stops, colliding with her gaze before she asks if it's true that he's a legendary warrior. We are back in the castle of the Demon King, in which the owl calls out to the king again with loud exclamations, before he appears in front of the lord and informs them that they have problems. A legendary warrior was summoned to conquer them. The former healer to heal asks again, and then grins, saying that this is a very outstanding nickname. Rock, who is standing a little apart, notices that none of the guys with such a nickname was really strong. The owl, however, stands on its own, saying that this man cut the whole city in half, so it may well turn out that he is very powerful. The king's servant, clearly strained by such a statement, immediately calls out to his master, saying that he should leave the legendary warrior to him. The guy blinks in surprise, looking at his ward as if not understanding what he wants, while the latter's eyes are burning at all, along with a bright smile. Having surrendered, the Lord allows, ordering to deal with that, but the main thing is that it should be done quietly. Rock bows, saying that he understood everything, before instantly disappearing from sight, leaving only the Lord and the chick inside. Blinking in surprise, the owl immediately tenses up. Rock in quiet, his eyes narrow in amazement. This is very strange. After that, we are shown that at the inn where the heroes stayed, night had already come a long time ago. The pink-haired girl, who is now, in fact, a healer, sleeps quite calmly in her bed before wincing when a bright blue light begins to beat into her face. She winces, squints her eyes, but still gets up, assuming a sitting position, while the same bright light comes from the window that is in her bedroom near the bed. The girl rubs her eyelids, looking out of the glass, not understanding what can happen in the middle of the night, before her eyes open in shock. Right there, outside the window, on the street, opposite each other stood Trios and Rock. The legendary warrior notes that it is very surprising that the servant of the Demon King came to him himself. The blonde man with a grin replies that he was ordered to do it as quietly as possible. The redhead only thanks for the fact that it did not occur to him to harm others as well. Rock grins only wider, sending these formalities to hell and squinting his eyes, focusing exclusively on the man in front of him. A bright and fiery aura emanated from him, which literally testified to his power, which made the blonde man's eyes light up, and he himself says that he is now very excited and wants to fight his opponent with might and main. Trios tightens his grip on the handle of his axe before saying a simple attack. They literally stand for another second in the crater that was formed under them before the battle began. Before simultaneously, quickly and abruptly, as if on command, they move towards each other. Rock throws his arm back, swinging, before some black liquid flows out of the veins of that one again, which will soon be transformed not into that familiar axe, but into a real sword with which he is going to deliver a fatal blow to the hero. But he swings his axe, grinning and slightly dodging the slashing sword before raising his hand with the weapon. Fortunately, Rock notices this in time and pulls out his second palm, from the veins and capillaries of which, already flowing in golden color, a real shield with a shiny emblem emerges, along which the axe blade immediately flies, crushing it into all splinters, which makes the guy jump back, looking in surprise at the fragments that remained after the shield. Damn it, this is just an inhuman level. It is at this moment that Trios squeezes the handle of his simple weapon with two hands and swings from the other side. Fortunately, the servant of the Demon King manages to notice this gesture in time, because he raises his bent clawed paw at the knee and with one sharp movement of the pelvis hits the blade with his foot, for some reason lands a couple of meters from their fight. Both rivals immediately push off from the ground and rush at each other in the air with their fists, intending either to kill one of them, or everyone who is here. Their fists finally collide, but with such power that Rock's body is involuntarily pushed back by a couple of meters from the shock wave. But he manages to prevent a possible fall with his own claws while the redhead is moving at great speed towards him. But for some reason, a smirk plays on the servant's face, and such a snide one that it can be said with full confidence that he has thought of something. The blonde man abruptly bends in half and pierces the stone with his palms, which immediately begins to pull up until something blue glows from under it. The last push, a strangled growl comes from his throat before that very stone stretches out into a huge mountain that stretches to the sky and blocks the way to him. But the legendary warrior was not even going to give up and stop. He swings only harder before his fist crashes into the cobblestone with all the dope. In an instant, cracks develop all over the makeshift top from the place of impact, before it simply falls to pieces at one moment. But there is no Rock behind her, oh no. He rushes from there to his opponent, swinging for a blow. He had a lot of fun. The knuckles are a couple of centimeters away from someone else's face. Now it's time for Trios to go to bed. The fist, it would seem, is about to overtake its target, but Trios dodges, as if it cost absolutely nothing for him, and then he squeezes his palm, which begins to burn with a bright yellow, almost fiery light. Rock does not have time to react, watching, as if in slow motion, as his hand moves to the side, and the opponent, right in his ribs. As soon as the knuckles collide with the side, the servant of the Demon King immediately opens his eyes in shock, clenching his teeth until blood begins to accumulate from inside. With one such formidable blow, the man sends his opponent several tens of meters into the air. And Rock, being there, does not waste time in vain, because the higher he rises, the clearer and clearer the wings break out of his shoulder blades, with the help of which he not only manages to stay in the air, but also to dive, reducing that recent distance between them to a minimum, scrolling in parallel, and throwing his leg again. The jokes are over. The foot of the blonde man with all his might and anger is going to punch the legendary warrior in the face, if not drive him into the ground like a nail. But he manages to put a block with both hands in time. Despite this, Rock continued to press, and with such force that soon during their fight, a blue ray of light breaks through the sky from all the tension. There is not a scratch on the red-haired man. Only the dust that has risen from their fight testifies to a recent event. The servant of the Demon King is breathing heavily while blood is flowing down his lips, and he himself does not understand how someone else's body could even endure something like this. But then abruptly his own body lets him down, as Trios grabs his calf with his paws, squeezing and pulling on himself, before turning around and sending Rock flying with a sharp movement, causing the latter to simply fly backwards and imprint it into a huge boulder, causing sparks to immediately fly apart and raises clouds of dust into the air. Smoke. And it would seem that this is the end of the battle, where the legendary warrior will be the winner. But no. A blonde guy immediately flies out of the smoke, who, apart from small scratches, did not even get anything. And he flies at his opponent, once again swinging his arm and intending to inflict at least some damage. But Trios blocks with two palms. Blow after blow, block after block, all in vain. At some point, the servant of the Demon King begins to think that, although he does not want to admit it, he will not be able to win this fight by force. In terms of punches and speed, this man is clearly superior to him. And at some point, someone else's silhouette, to which he inflicted such a huge number of attacks, simply blurs in front of his face before disappearing altogether, appearing behind his back. Rock, taken aback by this, does not even understand how the redhead could disappear from sight so quickly, and then he turns around and instantly strives to deliver another punch, as someone else's palm grabs his hand, squeezing. The opponent grunts, holding the fist of the blonde, and then notices that it's still strange. He seems to have the ability to forge his own weapons. After he lost the axe, he only had to use martial arts. At first, the guy even strains, but then finds the strength to grin, saying that he just wanted to fight him with his fists, since he was left without a weapon. Is it true? The expression on the redhead's face immediately takes on a darker shade. Did the brat underestimate him? They both jump off somewhere to the side before they end up with the same axe stuck in the ground. His fault is that he lost his weapon before a dangerous battle. The axe rises from the ground. From now on, let the Demon King's henchman show all his strength. The blade ignites almost with a hellish flame, and its tip points directly at someone else's chest. Then Trios himself will do the same. With his turquoise eyes, the guy looks at his opponent for a few seconds. Flames began to dance right behind him, before he quietly sighs, closes his eyelids, and only then reaches for his sword, which was also lying on the ground before. Maybe this is the place. It will be the end of it. The man immediately squints, focusing on the Rock, noticing that the latter's attitude to the fight has noticeably changed. The pose has improved, becoming with an ideal balance of defense and attack, and his attitude to demonstrating his skills. Their eyes collide for a split second before the Demon King's servant is the first to rush towards the man. They both swing their weapons, which burn either infernally red or bright turquoise, before the blades of the sword and axe collide. Yes, with such fury that everything flashes in a diameter of several meters with a bright yellow flash. A column of smoke, dust and burning after a recent battle spreads across the entire radius of the battle. The axe, which is still held by Trios, after such a blow simply diverges in cracks, and then completely crumbles into fragments, remaining in the palm of the legendary warrior only with a wooden stick. The man looks at his weapon before saying that the opponent coped well, since he only managed to kill him at least some kind of stabbing and cutting attempts. When the smoke gradually dissipates, Rock's battered and bloody face looks out of it, swearing and then lowering his head down, allowing him to fully examine his own body after the dust has settled down again. All beaten up, cut up and bloody, he no longer has any clothes on, except for his pants, and one wing is only half intact at all. The redhead mutters to him that he is only pretending to be strong. If he had recognized the difference between them from the very beginning and pulled out his weapon, perhaps he would have had a chance. Reckless and stupid, despite all the pain, the king's servant only grins, replying that this is not his style. And if they fought again, the result would be the same. Therefore, Rock raises his head, looking at his opponent before smiling, asking him to kill him. The man looks at him for a while before clenching his hand into a fist, preparing to deliver a crushing blow, and the blonde man himself lowers his head again, preparing to accept his fate. In his head, he apologizes to the Lord, because he let him down. A whistle of air is heard before someone else's palm gives him a noble slap on the back of the head, and Trios himself gives out that he knew that the fool would say it. The latter was even taken aback by this, while the legendary warrior began to explain to him. His duty is to defeat the Demon King, and he doesn't want to kill Rock at all. The latter is dissatisfied with this, immediately frowning his eyebrows and shouting that the man in front of him is a jerk, since he himself can easily get up and kill him. The redhead sighs softly before giving out just one word, "Knight," which makes the guy's eyes open in front of him. Loyal to your master, destined to die on the battlefield for beliefs, die if you lose. He has already admitted defeat, and moreover, the warrior knows that the servant is not going to attack him. He has the same respect that he shows to the enemy, which was immediately noticeable to a keen eye. The Rock Knight who has pride. Already in the castle of the Demon King, a half-naked and still beaten servant appears. The owl immediately jumps up to him, starting to ask what happened and wants to send him to be treated as soon as possible. But the guy does not listen, passing further down the corridor of the throne room. He walks past Beth and Achilles, stopping in front of his lord, who sits on the throne before kneeling, resting one knee and fist on the floor. Rock declares with complete firmness that he has been defeated as a knight, and therefore he must leave the demon castle for a while. Scarlet eyes collide with strangers, as if some thoughts on a mental level slip between them, and noticing another small smile on the servant's lips, the king calmly orders him to go. Thanking the gentleman, he immediately rises from his seat and heads towards the exit, while everyone is staring at his back uncomprehendingly. As soon as the tense silence is interrupted by the slam of the door, the owl immediately tenses up, not understanding how it happened, before the little elf, who had been sitting next to him, starts crying, because Uncle Rock is gone. The chick immediately orders him to be silent, but the boy continues to cry. Achilles unexpectedly adds that the Rock he knew would have chosen death rather than admit defeat. The she-devil answers him that such a thing only means that it was a complete defeat. From the enemy's point of view, the servant did not pose a threat, so they decided to let him go. Means, is there really a strong enemy coming to them? Already on the street, the whole body of the blonde man is trembling, and he himself remembers how the recent conversation ended. Trios told him that he had just one request. Since he has already been killed by him, then let him leave the Demon King's castle. And if he doesn't want to, then let him throw away his pride and kill him right now. Rock, of course, did not do this. Back in the castle, with a gloomy expression on his face, the king notices that this is now his battle.